And that was a little later too, which I think is a natural thing, you know. Suddenly we've got live.
Ringo Starr didn't step into the Beatles as some chosen brother. He came in as the backup plan everyone thought could be tossed aside. He smiled through those blinding stage lights while headlines clowned him as the luckiest drummer alive, and insiders whispered that he didn't really belong. Even inside the band, one member treated him like a temp worker, while an outsider played puppet master, turning brotherhood into betrayal. After decades of keeping quiet, Ringo has finally dropped the names he could never forgive. And wait till you hear who's on that list. The untold truth of why the Beatles once pushed Ringo to the edge. But Ringo's pain didn't start at Abbey Road. It started long before that, in a cold hospital bed in wartime Liverpool. As a kid, Richard Starkey spent more time fighting illnesses than playing outside. First peritonitis, then tuberculosis, back-to-back hits that stole his childhood. He missed school for years, fell behind everyone, and came out of the hospital a quiet, shy kid who felt like the world had already left him behind. That feeling, that everyone else knew more, moved faster, stuck with him for life. When fame hit, that same insecurity became his shadow. In the biggest band on earth, he always felt like the one with the shortest resume. Drumming was his only escape, his way out of feeling small. In local Liverpool bands like Rory Storm and the Hurricanes, he wasn't flashy, but his rhythm was tight, dependable, the heartbeat that kept the room alive. That's why in 1962, when the Beatles decided they needed someone stronger than Pete Best, they called Ringo. He walked into EMI not as a backup, but as the upgrade. But within days, humiliation struck hard. During the Love Me Do session, producer George Martin doubted him and secretly brought in session drummer Andy White, just in case Ringo couldn't cut it. That move stung, and decades later, Ringo confessed, "I went through hell personally because George Martin had this Andy White session drummer. I made him apologize every day." Imagine joining the most talked about band in the world, and the first thing they do is replace you on your debut single. The press only made it worse. Headlines joked he could barely keep time, and critics trashed him as the least talented Beatle. They said he was just lucky to stand behind them, but Ringo knew luck had nothing to do with it. John Lennon and Paul McCartney were the untouchable duo, the masterminds behind the Beatles' biggest hits. Everyone knew the pecking order. John and Paul wrote the songs. George fought to prove he was more than just the quiet genius waiting for his shot. And Ringo, he was the fun one, the steady hand who sang the silly songs and made people laugh. That's how the story went, the funny drummer who should have just been grateful to be there. But when Brian Epstein died in 1967, everything changed overnight. Epstein had been the glue holding those four egos together, the one who could calm the storms. Without him, chaos hit. And suddenly, that easygoing drummer found himself caught in the middle of three giants battling for control. And the one who made him feel the smallest? Paul McCartney, the tireless perfectionist who turned into the boss no one asked for. If there was one Beatle who pushed Ringo to his limit, it was definitely Paul. After Epstein's death, Paul filled the leadership vacuum without hesitation. He became the self-appointed captain, writing non-stop, calling the shots, and dragging everyone back into the studio when all they wanted was a break. Ringo didn't sugarcoat it. He once said bluntly, "Paul always made the phone call. Paul would want us to work all the time because he's the workaholic." On the surface, that sounds like dedication, right? But inside the band, it didn't feel like teamwork. It felt like control. Paul wasn't just writing the songs anymore. He was micromanaging how everyone else played them. Things boiled over during the tense White Album sessions in 1968. Paul was obsessing over every beat, every fill, every sound. He kept making Ringo redo a simple drum part again and again, until finally, in front of everyone, Paul sat down at the kit himself to show him how it should be done. For Ringo, the same guy who'd already been replaced once on Love Me Do, that moment cut deep. It wasn't just criticism, it was confirmation of his worst fear. He was disposable. So Ringo did the only thing that made sense. He walked out, he packed up, left the band, and vanished for 2 long weeks, while the rest of the Beatles tried to hold it together without him. Years later, he still talked about that moment with real pain, being treated like a piece of equipment instead of a brother. If Paul didn't even trust him to drum, what was he doing there at all? Sure, Paul's obsession with perfection kept the Beatles at the top, but it came with a price. It made everyone else feel like backup players on their own records. And for Ringo, the one who already carried the label of the lucky replacement, watching Paul literally take his seat at the drums wasn't just humiliating, it was his nightmare come true. When Ringo finally came back to the band, things looked calm on the surface. But that calm was a lie. The tension inside the Beatles was boiling hotter than ever, and everyone knew the cracks were getting deeper. They smiled for the cameras, but behind closed doors, it was a battlefield of pride, ego, and quiet resentment. Ringo returned to his drum kit, but deep down, he knew something had changed forever. By the time they started working on Let It Be, the brotherhood that once glued them together was gone. The sessions felt cold, like business meetings with guitars. John was distracted by his new life with Yoko. George was tired of being overlooked. Paul was still trying to hold everything together. And Ringo? He was just trying to keep the peace. The only one still showing up on time, still cracking jokes, still pretending it was all fine. But the truth was, he could feel the end coming. It wasn't fun anymore, he later admitted. And that's saying something coming from the man who once kept everyone laughing. Even when they finished Abbey Road, the final masterpiece, Ringo could sense the silent competition between them. Every track felt like a tug-of-war for control. Paul's perfectionism, John's rebellion, George's quiet frustration, and Ringo, sitting there, steady as always, wondering how the same band that once felt like family could turn into strangers sitting in the same room. He'd survived the criticism, the headlines, even being replaced, but nothing hurt more than realizing the magic was gone. And when the Beatles finally split in 1970, Ringo was the one who didn't lash out in public. He didn't write bitter songs or throw shade in interviews, but he remembered everything. The betrayals, the dismissive looks, the times they made him feel like he wasn't good enough. Decades later, when asked if he still held grudges, he said quietly, "There are names I'll never forget." That wasn't anger. That was truth spoken with years of scars behind it. Yet the wild part? Ringo outlasted the storm. While others fought over credit, money, and memories, he built his own lane. He went from the least talented Beatle to a respected solo artist, drummer for hire, and living legend. The same man who once felt disposable became the one everyone wanted around. The peacekeeper, the survivor, the Beatle who never stopped smiling through the chaos. And here's where the story takes a wild twist. Because the two men who once clashed inside the studio ended up becoming the last true link to the Beatles' brotherhood. In 2015, Paul McCartney stood center stage at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and personally inducted Ringo as a solo artist, the same man he once made feel replaceable. Paul even cracked a joke about inducing Ringo instead of inducting him, and the crowd roared. Over the years, the two have reunited on tour, shared stages, swapped hugs, and Paul has called their bond very special. It's ironic, right? The one Beatle who used to test Ringo's patience the most became the one still standing by his side, but behind all that feel-good nostalgia hides the part that cut Ringo the deepest, John Lennon and Yoko Ono. The day Ringo realized his leader was gone wasn't the day of John's death. It was the day he watched him slowly fade into someone he barely recognized. For years, John had been the rock, wild, rebellious, brilliant, but still the anchor that kept the band's spirit alive. Ringo admired him endlessly, even when John's moods got sharp or when the others clashed over songs. Ringo always stood right behind him, steady like a shadow, loyal through every argument. Then 1968 hit and everything changed. Quiet at first, then impossible to ignore. Yoko Ono didn't just enter John's life, she entered their space. The studio, the writing sessions, even the unspoken decisions that once belonged only to the four of them. The Beatles had always been a closed circle. 4 voices, 4 minds, 1 pulse. But suddenly, there were 5 people in the room, and only one of them seemed to matter anymore. The energy in those sessions got weird fast. During experimental recordings, Yoko would jump in mid-session, suggesting changes to tone or rhythm like she was part of the band. Ringo wasn't angry at her confidence. He was shocked at John's reaction. Instead of defending his bandmates, John instantly sided with her every time. One day, when Ringo tried to adjust a beat, John looked him straight in the eye and said coldly, "Just keep it even." That moment hit like a punch. To a drummer already labeled the least talented, it felt like being told his opinion didn't count anymore. From that point, the tension exploded. Anytime someone even hinted that Yoko's constant presence was affecting the music, John would snap. George Harrison once lost his temper, and John slammed a table in rage, accusing the band of disrespect. It wasn't about music anymore. It was about loyalty. And John's loyalty had shifted completely. For Ringo, who lived for peace and harmony, it was devastating. He wasn't angry, just heartbroken. In his eyes, the Beatles weren't just losing focus, they were losing John to a love so consuming it left no air for anyone else. Years later, Ringo would quietly admit the band was already falling apart by then. And in one rare, gut-wrenching memory, he described visiting John in New York in 1980. A final visit between two men who once shared the same beat, now separated by time, fame, and a silence that said everything. For a brief moment, things almost felt normal again. The laughter, the teasing, the spark that made them feel like brothers never really left. When Ringo visited John in New York, there was warmth, nostalgia, and that old rhythm between them. But just weeks later, tragedy hit like a lightning bolt. John Lennon was gone, assassinated before any of them could truly make peace. Their unspoken pain, the leftover anger, the words never said, all of it vanished in an instant. Whatever tension had lingered between them was frozen forever, replaced by a silence none of them could undo. But even before that heartbreak, another man had already helped tear their bond apart, the infamous outsider, Alan Klein. His arrival didn't come with fireworks. It came disguised as salvation. With Brian Epstein gone and Apple Corps bleeding money, the Beatles were in chaos. Global legends who couldn't even balance their own books. Ringo was exhausted by slick-talking executives who smiled big and delivered nothing. So when Klein showed up, blunt, sharp, and ready to fight, Ringo thought he'd finally met someone who could keep the wolves away. John was the first to welcome Klein in. George followed not long after, and Ringo, desperate for stability, signed on too. He later admitted why Klein's pitch worked. Klein was a hustler, and I felt it was time I had someone hustling for me. It sounded bold, but hidden behind that charm was a master manipulator who knew exactly how to twist loyalty into leverage. Klein read the band like a playbook. Paul's obsession with control, John's constant need for change, George's quiet resentment, and Ringo's hunger for peace. He didn't fix those cracks, he widened them. Suddenly, what used to be creative disagreements turned into war room battles. Meetings got ugly, alliances shifted, and decisions that once came easy now turned into 3-against-1 standoffs. Klein had played them perfectly, and Paul, always cautious about outsiders, refused to sign with him. Instead of calming the storm, Klein fed it. He urged John, George, and Ringo to move forward without Paul, fanning the flames of division until the group completely imploded. By 1970, the unimaginable happened. Paul sued the other three, and Klein, dragging the Beatles' brotherhood straight into court. That lawsuit didn't just end the band, it scorched what was left of their friendship. Ringo, caught in the middle again, felt the heartbreak more than anyone. The smiles, the trust, the unspoken bond they'd built in smoky clubs and sleepless studios, gone, replaced by paperwork and lawyers. The Beatles weren't destroyed by fame or failure, but by contracts, pride, and a man who knew exactly how to turn friends into rivals. Then came the cruel twist, the one that made all the other betrayals look small. By 1973, Ringo finally saw the truth about the man he thought had saved them. Alan Klein, the so-called fighter who promised to protect the Beatles, had been quietly playing his own game all along. He'd mismanaged money, twisted contracts, and used their fame as leverage for himself. The discovery hit like a gut punch. Ringo, who had backed Klein out of trust, realized he'd been hustled by the very man who claimed to be hustling for him. When the truth broke, Klein was fired fast, and investigations followed. The three Beatles who once stood behind him, John, George, and Ringo, had to admit they'd been wrong. The damage was done, but the regret ran deep. Later, Apple executive Alan Steckler revealed something heartbreaking. George once said, "The only way the Beatles can ever get together again is if Alan isn't there. I'm ready, so is Ringo." That line says it all. For Ringo, Klein wasn't just a bad business move. He was the symbol of the final betrayal, the man who guaranteed the Beatles would never stand together on one stage again. When the dust from that disaster finally cleared, Ringo was left facing a question that had haunted him for years. Was he really the least talented Beatle? It was the same joke people had thrown at him since day one, the lucky drummer, the one carried by Lennon and McCartney. After the breakup, those voices got louder, and for the first time, Ringo had to face them alone. No band, no shield, just him and the truth. But time has a way of flipping stories. The same recording sessions where Paul took over his drums and John brushed off his ideas were also the sessions where the producers saw something none of the critics ever did. Ringo was the only one who almost never fell off tempo. George Martin, the same man who once replaced him on Love Me Do, later admitted that Ringo wasn't just reliable, he was the rhythm itself. He was the click track, Martin said, the human anchor that held the band together. When younger drummers tried to mimic him, they couldn't. They could play the notes, sure, but they couldn't feel the groove, because Ringo's timing came from instinct, not calculation. Over time, the world finally caught on. His solo career didn't just survive, it thrived. Songs like Photograph and It Don't Come Easy proved he could shine on his own, and it wasn't nostalgia keeping his phone ringing, it was respect. Legends like George Harrison, Eric Clapton, Bob Dylan, and Elton John all called him back, not because he was a Beatle, but because his groove lifted their music. Even Paul, the perfectionist who once doubted his drumming, would one day stand proudly on stage and induct Ringo into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as a solo artist. That moment said it all. Ringo Starr's legacy was never about luck or simplicity. It was about feel, precision, and endurance. He wasn't the least talented Beatle. He was the heartbeat that held the magic together, and the longer time passes, the clearer it becomes. The rhythm of the Beatles never truly ended, because it still beats inside Ringo Starr. By the time the world caught up to what Ringo Starr really was, he had already stopped caring about proving himself, because his rhythm had already done it for him. The same man who once stood in the background now stood tall as the living pulse of the Beatles' story. While the others burned fast and bright, Ringo endured. He didn't need the spotlight. He became the heartbeat that refused to stop, long after the lights faded. Everywhere he went, people tried to define him. The funny one, the simple drummer, the lucky Beatle. But Ringo knew something they didn't. Consistency is its own kind of genius. While John's lyrics shook the world, Paul's melodies melted hearts, and George's spirituality opened new doors, Ringo was the one who gave their chaos a backbone. Without his timing, their masterpieces would have fallen apart. Even after decades, producers and drummers still analyze his beats, trying to figure out how something so simple could feel so alive. And here's what makes it wild. Ringo never chased validation. He just kept doing what he loved, with that same easy grin and those same sharp instincts. From the all-star band to his peace and love crusade, he built a second life rooted in joy, not bitterness. He turned old pain into rhythm and old memories into purpose. While some artists fade into nostalgia, Ringo evolved, a man who carried his legacy without letting it weigh him down. But the part that hits hardest, Ringo became the last living reminder of the Beatles' original spirit. With John and George gone, and Paul beside him like a lifelong brother in arms, Ringo now holds the rhythm of an era in his hands. Every time he steps on stage, every time he raises that peace sign, it's not just for the fans, it's for the friends he lost, the songs they built, and the dream they once lived together. He's not the least talented Beatle. He's the survivor, the steady soul who kept the music alive when everything else fell apart. The critics who once mocked him now write tributes calling him the drummer who changed rock forever. His groove, his timing, his humility. That's what shaped the heartbeat of modern music. And maybe that's the real ending. Not with tragedy or tension, but with rhythm. The same rhythm that carried him from hospital beds in Liverpool to world stages filled with screams. The same rhythm that turned four young dreamers into immortals. Ringo Starr never needed to be the loudest Beatle. He was the one who made sure the music never stopped. His legacy isn't just in what he played, but in what he held together. Because in the story of the Beatles, one truth still stands clear. When the world lost its harmony, Ringo kept the beat. Ringo Starr was never the weak link, he was the missing piece. The quiet force that no one realized they needed until decades later, when the proof was written in gold records, sold-out tours, and the respect of every legend who ever picked up an instrument beside him. For half a century, he's been the steady heartbeat behind the chaos, the man who turned criticism into rhythm and silence into legacy. They called him lucky, but luck doesn't last this long. What lasted was skill, patience, and heart, the kind that kept the Beatles' magic alive even when the band was long gone. Ringo wasn't just keeping time, he was the time, the rhythm that defined an entire era. From Love Me Do to Abbey Road, from the White Album storms to solo triumphs, his groove became the glue holding together the greatest sound in music history. So now that you've seen the full picture, the betrayal, the tension, the loyalty, and the forgiveness, it's your turn to decide. Who do you think Ringo resented the most deep down? Was it Paul, the perfectionist who doubted his playing? John, the hero who drifted away? Or Alan Klein, the outsider who tore the band apart for profit? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to know whose part in this story hit you hardest, and why. Because when you strip away the fame, the fights, and the rumors, what's left is a drummer who never gave up, the man who turned endurance into art. Ringo Starr wasn't just a Beatle. He was the balance that kept the dream alive long enough for the rest of the world to believe in it. And if you want more raw, behind-the-scenes stories like this, the truth behind the fame, the legends, and the scars, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. There are still so many secrets hiding behind those smiling faces, and we're just getting started. See you in the next video.